Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, we're venturing into the darkest corners of America's wilderness, places where the trail ends, the road bends, and the night swallows every sound. I'll be sharing a collection of true encounters and chilling legends from remote mountains, shadowed forests, and lonely backroads across the country. These aren't campfire myths. These are real experiences that linger long after the sun goes down. So grab a blanket, kill the lights, and settle in for a journey where beauty meets terror. Don't forget to subscribe, drop a like, and share your own eerie stories in the comments. Now, let's begin. Story 1. Shadows Beneath the Pine Canopy. I remember that trip like it happened yesterday, even though it's been years. I was 22, desperate to get away from the heat and noise of the city, and the Blue Ridge Mountains had always called to me with their quiet isolation. My friends and I packed our gear into an old, rattling SUV and drove until the asphalt ended, leaving only winding dirt roads that smelled of pine and wet soil. By the time we found a clearing deep in the woods, the sun was a low, burnt orange smear behind the mountains. We set up camp quickly, pitching tents and gathering firewood, laughing and joking to keep the nerves at bay. That first night, the forest seemed alive in a way that was comforting at first. Branches creaked gently, insects hummed a lullaby of sorts, and the occasional owl punctuated the darkness with its call. But then I started to notice things that didn't belong, shadows that moved oddly, stretching and twisting between the trees in ways that didn't align with any light source. I told myself it was just my eyes playing tricks in the dim firelight, the forest's normal rhythm warping into something sinister when you're too tired or too alert. Still, unease began to settle in, a weight in my chest I couldn't shake. I would glance toward the edge of the clearing and catch a shadow out of the corner of my eye, something darting between the pines, and each time I looked directly, there was nothing. Around midnight, the sensation became undeniable. I was lying in my tent, trying to sleep, when I heard a subtle crunch in the underbrush, the sound so soft I almost thought it was my imagination. My heart began to hammer. I crawled out of the tent and froze under the moonlight filtering through the canopy. There, in the damp soil, were footprints that were not ours. They circled the campsite in a wide, deliberate path before vanishing into the darkness. They weren't deep enough to belong to a grown man, but too precise to belong to an animal. My skin prickled. I whispered for my friends, but they were sound asleep, unaware. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a strange sound that made my stomach twist. It was faint at first, almost like murmured words carried just beyond comprehension. I strained my ears, and the whispers seemed to ride the gusts of air between the trees, fleeting and impossible to pin down. Sometimes it was laughter, low and tight, other times like someone was calling my name, but not clearly, as if the language itself was wrong. I shook my head, trying to convince myself I was imagining it, but the unease had lodged itself deep, and my body refused to relax. I went back to the tent and whispered to my friends to wake up, though I didn't tell them everything, just enough to rattle them. We all stepped outside together, scanning the forest, flashlights slicing through the darkness. Everything seemed still, deceptively normal, but the footprints were gone, leaving only the churned soil where they had once been. That didn't calm us. Instead, it made the woods feel heavier, more oppressive. We tried to tell jokes, to act brave, but our laughter felt hollow. Every crack of a branch, every rustle in the undergrowth made us tense, hearts hammering in unison. Sleep was impossible. I kept seeing movement out of the corner of my eye, shapes slipping behind trees, between the firelight and the shadows. My friends murmured that they were probably deer or raccoons, but I knew that wasn't right. I knew the difference between an animal and whatever it was that watched us. When the wind stirred, the whispers returned, brushing against our ears like a distant conversation we weren't meant to understand. At some point, I thought I saw a figure crouch just beyond the firelight, motionless, staring. I froze, holding my breath. It was gone before anyone else could see it. By dawn, the first light revealed subtle changes in the clearing. Our carefully stacked firewood had been scattered. Some pieces moved toward the tree line, as if nudged by unseen hands. And then I saw it, a single old boot, worn and mud-streaked, lying at the edge of the clearing. None of us recognized it. None of us spoke. The boot was alone, abandoned, and yet somehow purposeful. My stomach twisted as I imagined whoever or whatever had left it there, watching us from just beyond the trees. We packed up without a word. Not a single joke, not a single nervous laugh to ease the tension. Every snap of a twig underfoot made our hearts pound louder. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that figure from the night, crouched or crouching behind the trunks, following our every move. By the time we reached the car, the sun had fully risen, and the forest seemed normal again, almost inviting, but the unease lingered like a shadow over my thoughts. I didn't want to talk about it, and neither did anyone else. Some part of us knew that speaking aloud would make it real, would draw the attention of whatever had been in the shadows. The drive back to the city was silent, punctuated only by the occasional muttered observation about the heat or the road conditions. We didn't speak of the footprints or the whispers, the old boot or the movement in the trees, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't left the woods behind, that the forest had followed us in some quiet, subtle way. I would feel it in the hum of the city streets, the way shadows in my apartment seemed to flicker in ways they shouldn't. Nights became restless. The wind against my window sounded like voices, faint and distant, impossible to locate. I began to notice strange things in my own yard, small displacements of objects that I knew I had left untouched, a sense that eyes were watching from just beyond the fence. Years later, I tried to tell myself it was just fear, that the combination of isolation, darkness, and exhaustion had played tricks on me. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. The Blue Ridge carries its own life. Something patient and observant. It watches, it waits, it knows when outsiders intrude. I don't return there. I don't hike alone anymore. Sometimes, late at night, I can still feel the weight of the shadows, the pressure of eyes just beyond what my own senses can detect. The memory doesn't fade, it never will. Even now I wonder about that old boot and who or what left it there. The campfire we built is gone. The clearing has probably grown over, yet I can almost picture the paths of those footprints, circling, deliberate, vanishing into nothing. The whispers haunt me more than the shadows. They were never coherent, but they were real enough to terrify, to make me feel small and exposed. The forest didn't need to show itself fully, didn't need to reveal its shape or form. Its presence alone was enough. I tell this story quietly to few people, because the fear isn't in the telling, it's in remembering. The forest doesn't forgive trespassers, and it doesn't forget. I can still feel the damp soil under my fingers, the chill of that first night settling into my bones. I can hear the faint crackle of leaves, the whispers that drifted on the wind, calling to me in a language I never learned. Every so often I swear I catch a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye, shadows flitting between the trees, just beyond reach, just beyond reason. The memory lingers, and so does the dread. We never spoke of that night again. And some nights, when the wind rattles against the windows and the city is quiet, I think I hear those same whispers, and I wonder if they'll ever leave me entirely. Story 2. The Hiker Who Vanished at Twilight. I had always loved hiking alone. There's a strange clarity that comes with being out in the mountains by yourself. the quiet that feels almost holy, the way the forest seems to breathe around you. That fall, I decided to push further than usual, past the sections of the Blue Ridge I had explored before. The air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of pine and damp leaves, and the sun hung low, painting the ridges in molten gold. I had been walking for hours, listening to the scuff of my boots on the leaf-strewn path, and the occasional call of a distant bird, when I saw him, a figure moving ahead just beyond a bend in the trail. At first, I thought it was another hiker, maybe someone trying to make it to a campsite before nightfall. I called out, my voice echoing oddly in the steep hollows of the mountains, but there was no answer. The figure slowed, almost deliberately, and then stopped entirely. I squinted, trying to make out more in the dim light, and that's when I swear I saw it glance back at me. The face was pale, ghostly in the twilight, features drawn tight with something I couldn't name. My heart skipped, and an unease settled in my chest, the way it does when you feel the forest isn't just watching, it's aware. I called again, louder this time, my voice cracking, but the figure didn't move. Then, as I took another step forward, it vanished, just gone, like a wisp of fog swallowed it whole. I reached the spot where I had last seen him and froze. There were no footprints in the soft earth, not a single mark that anyone had been there. The trail itself seemed subtly different too. The trees leaned in ways they hadn't moments before, their gnarled limbs twisting against the fading light. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I retraced my steps, half expecting to see him emerge from between the trunks, but there was nothing, only the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. Every instinct screamed that I should turn back, but I kept going, following the path as if drawn by some compulsion I didn't understand. Hours passed, and the light fell faster than I expected. Shadows pooled between the trees, stretching and bending with the uneven ground. Every time I looked ahead, the trail seemed to shift, the familiar markers I had passed earlier appearing in the wrong places or vanishing entirely. My mind tried to reason it away. Tiredness, the fading light, perhaps an overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. There was something else in the woods that evening, something that moved without sound, something patient. As twilight gave way to dusk, I thought I heard footsteps behind me. At first, soft, deliberate, then fading into silence. My pulse quickened, and I turned sharply, flashlight cutting through the dim. Nothing, only the wind, or so I told myself. The trail twisted again, leading me down a narrow pass flanked by dense underbrush. The air felt heavier here, carrying the faint smell of damp earth and something metallic, almost like rusted iron. I paused, straining to hear beyond the whisper of leaves, and then it came. A whisper, barely audible, almost as if the forest itself was speaking. My name? No, not exactly. Something like it, stretched and warped, unintelligible but intimate enough to make my stomach knot. Fear pressed against me, subtle at first, then sharp and insistent. I considered turning back, but every path seemed unfamiliar now. The trail I had followed, an illusion. Trees twisted and shifted, shadows forming shapes that suggested movement, glimpses of someone or something standing just beyond the edge of the light. I stumbled, heart hammering, and that's when I realized the truth. The figure I had seen wasn't gone. It had never left. The trail itself had bent around me, guiding me deeper into a part of the mountains I wasn't meant to find. Night fell fully, and with it came a cold, oppressive quiet. The wind had died down, leaving only the distant call of an owl, and the smell of damp moss and decaying leaves hung thick in the air. I could feel eyes on me, though I couldn't see who or what was watching. Every shadow seemed alive, every rustle deliberate. I pressed on, steps unsteady, and then I saw a faint glow ahead. Maybe another hiker, another campsite. I moved toward it, desperate for reassurance, only for the glow to vanish as I approached, leaving me in complete darkness. By the time I found my way back to the main trail, dawn was breaking, though the forest seemed unchanged, peaceful almost. I stopped, looking back, and there was no sign of the figure, no mark of anything unusual. Just the quiet, ordinary trail I had known for years. I tried to tell myself it was a hallucination, a trick of the fading light and my solitude, but I knew better. Some part of the Blue Ridge doesn't like outsiders wandering too far. Some part of it watches, waits, and guides those who stray. I returned later with a friend, hoping for reassurance, for the comfort of companionship. We hiked the same trail, daylight breaking through the canopy in soft gold and green, the path unremarkable, welcoming even. Birds sang, the wind rustled the leaves gently, nothing moved, nothing whispered. And yet, I knew what I had seen, the fleeting glimpse of that pale face, the way it had watched me and then disappeared. I could feel the memory pressing in the corners of my mind, unshakable, even now. I remember the sensation of being followed, of the forest bending around me, the way the trail itself seemed alive, patient and aware. I try to keep my voice quiet when I tell this story, because it's not the seeing that unsettles me. It's the knowing that some part of the mountains had chosen to watch me, and perhaps to let me go only because I had not lingered. I never hiked alone again after that, never ventured into those deeper stretches of the Blue Ridge. Every time I pass a ridge, I glance into the shadows, half expecting to see that same figure, pale and still, watching from beyond the trees. It's a weight that doesn't lift, that lingers in the quiet moments, the nights when the wind whistles through my apartment, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp soil. I remember the cold that settled in my chest, the way the forest seemed to breathe around me, patient and unhurried. And sometimes, late at night, I think I can hear the whisper again, almost like a name, stretched and warped, calling from somewhere far off, deep in the mountains. The memory doesn't fade, and the forest doesn't forget. Story 3, Whispers, near the mountain stream. I had chosen that spot along the mountain stream because it seemed perfect. Clear water running over smooth rocks, the gentle gurgle like a lullaby, and the trees arching overhead in a quiet cathedral of green. I set up my small tent near the bank, stacking firewood carefully, and thought about how peaceful the night would be. The moon rose slowly, painting the water in silver streaks, making the ripples look like liquid light. I sat by the stream for a while, listening to the water and the wind rustling through the pines, feeling that rare kind of solitude that's hard to find anywhere else. Everything seemed normal, too perfect almost, and I welcomed the stillness. Night fell fully, and I crawled into my sleeping bag, expecting to drift easily into sleep. But soon I heard it, faint at first, barely audible, like the rustle of leaves. Then I realized it wasn't the wind at all. Whispers drifted through the tree line, fragmented syllables that I couldn't make sense of, a rhythm like a chant, slow and deliberate. I sat up, straining to listen, heart thumping. My rational mind told me it was nothing, maybe the wind, maybe animals moving among the underbrush, but something about it felt intentional, deliberate, as if someone or something was speaking just beyond my reach. I unzipped my tent and peered into the darkness. That's when I saw them, small figures darting between the trees, too quick, too precise to be wildlife. They moved like shadows with purpose, disappearing and reappearing at the edge of my vision. I froze, unable to move, my chest tightening with a pressure I can only describe as the forest itself pressing in, watching me, judging me. Every instinct screamed to leave, to run, but my body refused, locked by the certainty that whatever was out there wanted me to see it, to know that it was aware. The whispers grew, but I still couldn't understand them. Each word or fragment of a word slid into the air, brushing my ears like invisible fingers. I wanted to call out, to ask who was there, but my throat was dry, and I didn't want to provoke whatever it was. I watched the figures move, shadows flitting from tree to tree, circling the clearing subtly, always at the edges of the light cast by my small fire. I could feel their gaze even when I couldn't see them directly, a weight pressing down on me that made my breathing shallow. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes and centuries all at once. The fire burned low, casting long, twitching shadows across the ground. I stayed still, eyes wide, heart hammering, too afraid to even blink. Occasionally, I thought I caught a glimpse of a face, pale and small, peering from behind a tree before disappearing. I couldn't reconcile what I was seeing with anything I knew. These weren't people I'd met, and they weren't animals. They were something in between, something that moved through the forest like it belonged there in a way I never could. By the time dawn broke, casting pale light through the pines, I could see the aftermath of the night more clearly. Symbols had been etched into the mud near my tent, small scratches and lines arranged in patterns I didn't recognize. Some looked almost like letters, others more like markings you might leave for tracking or counting, but there was no explanation, no clue to their origin. I knelt and traced one with my finger, the mud cold and wet beneath my hand, and felt a shiver run through me. Whoever, or whatever, had made these symbols had been close, intimate in a way that left me feeling exposed and raw. I packed up immediately, leaving behind almost everything I had brought. My firewood, my cooking supplies, even my journal, left scattered near the bank of the stream. My hands shook as I loaded the tent into my backpack, every sound from the tree line making me jump, every movement in the shadows setting my heart racing. I didn't look back as I ran through the forest, following the faint path that led back to the main trail, and I didn't slow until I reached the gravel road where I had parked my car. Even after I was safely back on the road, driving down the winding mountains, I couldn't shake the sense of being followed. The feeling pressed against my chest, the memory of whispers and fleeting shapes lingering at the edges of my mind. I told myself I had imagined it, that isolation and fear had conjured the figures, that the wind had carried strange sounds and I had misinterpreted them. But deep down, I knew I hadn't imagined it. I knew the forest had been alive that night, aware of me, observing me, leaving messages in the mud as reminders that I had trespassed. Years later, I think about that stream whenever I pass a river or creek, and I remember the way the water had looked under the moonlight, so calm and inviting, so ordinary, hiding the dread that lingered just beyond its edges. I wonder if the figures still move among the pines, if the whispers still echo through the mountains, waiting for someone else to stumble into that quiet clearing. I can still hear them sometimes when the wind shifts against my window, a faint trace of syllables I can't understand, calling from the distance, reminding me that some places are never truly safe. Even now, I avoid camping alone. Even now, the thought of that stream makes my stomach tighten. The symbols remain a vivid memory, etched into my mind as sharply as they were in the mud. The forest that night was patient and deliberate, indifferent to fear, leaving behind only traces, only whispers, only the knowledge that I had encountered something I was never meant to fully understand. And that knowledge stays with me, a constant, quiet weight, a reminder that the mountains have their own rules, their own secrets, and that some parts of the Blue Ridge are meant to remain untouched. Story 4. The lantern left, burning. We had been hiking all day, and by the time we crested the last ridge, the sun was a fading smear behind the mountains. Hunger and fatigue made every step heavier, and the forest around us seemed to grow quieter, as dusk settled in. Then we stumbled upon a clearing, unexpected and perfectly framed by tall pines. In the center of the clearing, a lantern burned with a soft golden glow, its flame dancing lightly in the evening breeze. There was no campsite nearby, no smoke curling from a fire pit, no footprints pressed into the soft earth. It was as if someone, or something, had placed it there just for us to find. Against every instinct we approached, drawn by both curiosity and exhaustion. The light flickered, casting long shadows across the trees, making the branches appear to lean toward us. I remember feeling the weight of the forest press in, the kind of quiet that isn't comforting but watchful, alive in a way that makes your skin crawl. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe a camper had left it behind and wandered off. Maybe someone was returning from a hunt, but there was a strange stillness to the air, a tension that made my teeth ache with anticipation. That night, we set up our tents near the edge of the clearing, careful not to get too close to the lantern. But even as we tried to rest, the subtle sounds of the forest felt amplified. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made my heart jump. And then there were footsteps, light, deliberate, circling the clearing, coming from the undergrowth, but never close enough to see. I peeked from the tent, holding my breath, and there was nothing, just the swaying trees and the soft flicker of the lantern's flame. My friends whispered to each other, uneasy, and I could see the tension reflected in their faces. We tried to sleep, but the feeling of being watched never left. Hours passed in a kind of restless half-sleep. Every time I dozed, I would wake to the sound of branches brushing against the tent, soft and deliberate, like someone, or something, was pacing, testing our presence. The lantern remained, flickering, stubbornly anchored in the center of the clearing. Then, when I mustered the courage to look outside again, it was gone. I blinked, heart pounding, scanning the darkness, but there was no trace of it, no footprints, no glow, no sign that anyone had passed through. My stomach knotted with the realization that we were not alone, that whatever had placed the lantern there was still aware of us, watching, moving unseen. Sleep became impossible. Every snap, every rustle, every hint of movement sent me sitting up, ears straining. I couldn't see it, couldn't track it, but I felt its presence, patient and deliberate. The forest around us seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting to see what we would do. I thought of turning over, closing my eyes, pretending it wasn't there, but even in the dark, I knew the clearing itself had changed. Subtly, almost imperceptibly, as though the forest were nudging us along a path we hadn't yet noticed. When morning finally arrived, pale light filtered through the trees, illuminating the clearing in an eerie glow. And that's when we noticed it. The lantern had moved. Not far, only toward the edge of the woods, but enough to be deliberate. No footprints marked its path, no disturbances in the soil, nothing that made sense. The fire still burned, as if waiting, as if guiding us, and a chill ran through me that I couldn't shake. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence, that the wind had rolled it, that maybe one of my friends had moved it in half-conscious sleep. But they all denied it, and the forest itself seemed to confirm that none of us had touched it. We packed our camp quickly, the hunger and fatigue replaced by unease. Every step back to the trail was careful, tentative, our eyes flicking constantly to the trees at the edges of the clearing. The forest was silent now, no whispers, no footsteps, but I could feel the weight of the unseen eyes lingering, tracking us, patient and patient still. By the time we returned to the main path, the clearing seemed normal again, ordinary in its sunlit serenity, yet I could not shake the feeling that we had been nudged, herded even, by something unseen, something that moved with intent in the darkness. Even now I think about that night and the lantern. I can picture it flickering in the clearing, steadfast and deliberate, casting shadows that stretch toward us, and I can feel the way the forest seemed to breathe around it. I have never returned to that ridge, never ventured into that part of the woods again, but the memory remains sharp and insistent. Sometimes when the wind moves against my window or branches scrape the side of my house, I can almost hear the same deliberate steps, the soft brush of movement, and I imagine the lantern burning somewhere in a clearing I will never find again, waiting for someone else to stumble into its quiet, deliberate trap. Story 5. The Cabin with No Owner. The first time I saw the cabin, I thought it was just a forgotten relic, swallowed by the ridges and the pines. We had been hiking for hours, tracing a narrow trail that wound along steep slopes, the kind that makes you grip the roots and rocks just to keep from sliding down. The sky was dim, tinged with the gold of late afternoon, and the air had that crisp bite that promised frost in a few weeks. Then, between the trees, I noticed it. A small structure, almost hidden, its roof sagging, walls mottled with moss. My friend Mark hesitated, like he could already feel the cold weight of whatever lingered there, but curiosity overpowered caution. We approached slowly, boots crunching over dry leaves, and the cabin grew more real, more solid, more unwelcoming with each step. The door hung crooked on its hinges, the rusted metal moaning as I pushed it open. The smell hit me first, damp wood, mildew, and a strange, earthy rot, as though the cabin itself was decomposing from the inside out. The sunlight spilling through the gaps in the walls and roof lit a single chair by the fireplace, and for a moment I imagined someone had just been sitting there, staring into the soot-darkened hearth. On the wall there were scratches deep into the wood, jagged and frantic, letters that didn't form words I recognized. I ran my fingers lightly over them, wincing at the rough splinters, feeling a shiver creep down my spine. Mark whispered something about the place being alive in a way, but I just laughed, trying to shake the unease. We decided to camp there for the night, thinking shelter was better than continuing into the ridge with night approaching. Night in the mountains changes everything. The wind slides through the pines like a low, hissing voice, carrying the chill straight into your bones. We built a small fire outside, its glow barely reaching the edges of the cabin. Inside, shadows played across the walls, stretching and bending in ways that made the scratches seem to crawl. When we went in to sleep, the chair by the fireplace was just there, but the moment I closed my eyes, I thought I heard it move. A soft, scraping sound like wood against stone, followed by a barely audible creak, as if the chair had been pulled closer to the fireplace. I convinced myself it was the wind or the house settling, but the sound returned, persistent, deliberate, and then, as if someone or something was circling the room, I felt a cold pressure against my chest, like the air itself had weight. I don't think I slept. Every time I blinked, the scratches on the wall seemed sharper, fresher, as though they had been made while we were watching. Mark muttered in his sleep, and I could hear the floorboards creak, even though I knew we hadn't touched them. The chair scraped again, louder this time, moving in slow, jerky motions, almost as if whatever had been sitting in it had gotten up and paced in front of the hearth. I froze, heart hammering, convinced I would see a figure if I looked. But there was nothing, just the chair, alone, and the air thick with the smell of decay. The scratches on the walls, they had multiplied. Lines crisscrossed the originals, forming patterns I could not make sense of. Shapes that pressed against my mind as I stared at them. By morning, light filtered in through the gaps in the walls, pale and weak. I wanted to run, to leave, but I felt compelled to inspect the scratches more closely. They were no longer random, frenzied lines. They seemed almost intentional, deliberate, as if the cabin itself had been trying to communicate something. Mark was pale, silent, refusing to meet my eyes. When I turned toward the chair, it had moved slightly from where I remembered placing it. Not far, just a foot or so, but enough to make my stomach twist. We packed quickly, our usual sense of adventure replaced with a pressing, unspoken fear. Before leaving, I glanced back at the cabin. It seemed smaller in the daylight, less menacing, but I could swear the scratches on the walls seemed to pulse with a dark energy, waiting. Even after we left, the ridge haunted me. The image of the chair scraping across the floor, the sharp, alien letters on the walls lingered in my mind. That night, in my apartment, I dreamt of the cabin. In the dream, I was back among the ridges, and the cabin was there again, though the trees seemed closer, almost pressing in. The chair sat by the fireplace, empty, yet I felt its presence, heavy and patient, watching. The scratches had multiplied, covering every wall, every surface, forming a chaotic pattern I could not decipher. I woke drenched in sweat, heart racing, and for a brief, horrible moment, I could swear I heard a scraping sound from the corner of my bedroom. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was stress, the isolation of the hike, or some primal fear of the wilderness. But when I closed my eyes, I could see the cabin, the chair, and the scratches as vividly as if I were standing there again. Weeks passed, and I told myself the ridge had swallowed its secrets, that the mountains were just old, lonely places that played tricks on the mind. But my dreams did not relent. The scratches became clearer. The chair moved closer in my imagination, and the smell of rot and damp wood, lingered, clinging to my sheets, my clothes, my skin. I never returned to the ridge. I couldn't. Even telling Mark about my dreams only made me more certain of it. He had nightmares too, though he tried to laugh them off. It's hard to explain, even now, what it felt like to be in that cabin. The air was thick, almost sentient, pressing against your chest and filling your ears with whispers you couldn't understand. And the chair, it was the heart of it, a silent observer, a remnant of some presence that had once been there, or perhaps still was, something that understood the forest and the mountains better than we ever could, something that had been left behind, patient and waiting. People talk about the Blue Ridge and the old cabins tucked into the ridges, the ones that no one owns but everyone has heard about. They say they are empty, abandoned, harmless relics of a bygone era. I cannot say that is true. That cabin, that chair, and the scratches, they are alive in memory, a lingering weight that follows me. I see them in the dark corners of rooms, in the spaces between trees during my own hikes, and sometimes I think I hear the scraping sound, faint but unmistakable, like a reminder. Even now, I cannot explain what we encountered. No one can. We were cautious hikers, experienced, not easily spooked, and yet the cabin unnerved us in a way that left deep, invisible scars. I have considered going back, armed with cameras, notebooks, rational tools, hoping to uncover some explanation. But I cannot. The fear is not in the cabin itself, not entirely, but in the understanding that it is patient, that it waits, that whatever left those scratches, whatever moved the chair, continues to linger in ways we cannot comprehend. I tell this now because the memory is too persistent, too vivid to ignore. I tell it because the mountains, the ridges, and the forgotten places in the forest have a weight, a presence that does not forgive intrusion. And I tell it because sometimes, late at night, when the wind is just right and the silence presses against my ears, I hear it, the faint scrape of wood on floorboards, the reminder that some cabins are never empty, some scratches never fade, and some chairs never stop moving. I do not know who or what was in that cabin. I do not know if it was a person, long gone but echoing in memory, or something else, something older and patient, steeped in the forest itself. I do know that it left an impression deep and inescapable, and that the scratches on the walls, the chair by the fireplace, the smell of rot, they are permanent markers in my mind, unyielding and unexplainable. Some nights, I wonder if I will ever be free of them, if the mountains themselves will ever release me from the echo of that place. And the more I think about it, the more I feel that the cabin waits, always waits, ready for the next pair of curious eyes, the next set of footsteps daring enough to cross its threshold. Even writing this, I glance at the corners of the room, at the shadows that seem just a little too long, and I wonder if it is foolish to speak of the cabin at all, because I know, in my bones, that some part of it has followed me home, patient and silent, waiting for the moment when I am alone, and the scraping begins again. The chair, the scratches, the cabin with no owner, they are still with me, and I fear they always will be. Story 6. Echoes from the Foggy Ridge. I remember that morning clearly, the kind where the fog hangs thick and heavy, the air tasting like damp stone and cold pine needles. We had planned to climb the ridge early, eager for the view, for the quiet and isolation that only the Appalachian backcountry can offer. I've hiked those trails a dozen times, thought I knew them like the back of my hand, but that day the mountain felt different. Dense fog had rolled down the slopes overnight, smothering the forest in a blanket so white it was almost unnatural. As we began our ascent, each step seemed muffled, swallowed by the mist. Branches dripped condensation, leaves gleamed wet and grey, and the usual morning chorus of birds was absent, replaced by a silence that felt too complete, too deliberate. At first, it was easy to convince myself that it was nothing more than fog, that the forest always seemed quieter when it wore its white shroud. But then the sounds began, faint at first, soft, almost indistinct. I thought I heard someone calling my name. "Hey, wait!" I spun around, expecting to see one of my friends behind me, but the fog obscured everything. I squinted, and it was like the trees themselves were moving, shadows twisting where none should be. My heart started to race, not just from the climb, but from that feeling of being watched, of being studied. We kept moving, telling each other to stay calm, to focus on the path ahead. Every step seemed to echo in the fog, though strangely the echoes didn't sound like mine. Somewhere just beyond the tree line I could hear laughter, high-pitched, nervous laughter, like someone playing a trick or taunting us. I froze, staring into the white nothing, convinced my imagination had betrayed me. My friends claimed not to hear it, which only made me doubt my own senses. But then the whispers started, voices that weren't words, just fragments of syllables, carried through the mist. They seemed to circle me, rising from the ground, drifting from the trees, impossible to locate. I gripped my walking stick tighter, knuckles whitening. The fog thickened with every step. It wasn't static, it moved like a living thing. Shapes flickered along its edge, too quick to be natural. I caught glimpses of dark figures just outside my line of sight, and every time I blinked, they vanished. It was like the fog itself was shaping them, teasing my eyes. I wanted to call out, to regroup with my friends, but the sound of my own voice felt swallowed, muted, as if the mountain didn't want us to speak. My chest tightened. I could feel the damp cold pressing in from all sides, the trees leaning inward in some impossible geometry that made the trail vanish beneath our feet. Hours seemed to pass. Every landmark we knew, the ridgeline, the old oak, the creek we had passed countless times, was gone. The fog had claimed it all. Panic began to creep in. My friends looked uneasy too, glancing over their shoulders, shifting from foot to foot as if the forest might suddenly reach out and grab them. I could hear the sound of footsteps, light but deliberate, moving around us in the fog, never revealing themselves. I started to whisper my friends' names and the fog answered. My own voice returned as a distorted echo, warped and elongated, and sometimes it called back my name in a voice that wasn't mine. By midday, or what I thought was midday, the fog had made us completely disoriented. Trails dissolved into nothing. Rocks and roots that should have been familiar became strange obstacles. I stumbled repeatedly, catching myself on wet branches, shaking leaves loose like tiny ghosts. The air was thick and clinging. Each breath was a struggle, and all the while the whispers persisted, now joined by faint, irregular taps, fingers on bark, stones shifting underfoot. It was impossible to tell. I felt as though the forest had its own consciousness, watching us, herding us, guiding us somewhere we didn't want to go. Night began to fall without warning. The fog didn't lift, it grew denser, turning the forest into a featureless, grey void. I remember thinking, distinctly, that we would never leave, that the mountain had decided we belonged to it now. The shadows danced more aggressively at this point, and I could swear that some of the figures were crouched low, moving inhumanly, shifting just at the edge of the mist. My friends were starting to panic too, their voices higher, more frantic, calling directions that made no sense. We tried to backtrack, but every path we thought we recognized led us deeper, always deeper, as if the mountain itself had rerouted us. I remember the precise moment I realized we were lost. There was a clearing ahead, barely visible through the fog. I thought it was a meadow we had passed before, a place we could rest and maybe figure out our bearings. But when we reached it, it was different. No creek, no familiar rocks, no trail markers. Just a flat stretch of sod, empty except for the lingering fog curling along the ground. And then I heard it. A soft, deliberate exhale, not from my friends, not from any animal, but something else. It was close, just beyond the clearing. We froze, all of us, hearts hammering. The fog shifted and I saw the faintest outline of a person, or maybe it was just a shadow shaped like a person, moving slowly along the tree line. We didn't wait to see more. We ran. I don't remember how long, maybe hours, maybe minutes. The fog seemed to chase us, pressing in tighter, our breath steaming in the cold, moist air. Eventually the mist thinned and the forest opened up into a parking lot, exactly where we had started our hike. It was impossible, and yet there we were, disheveled, soaked, shaken beyond comprehension. The car sat quietly, like nothing had happened, the fog dissipating into nothing. My friends looked at each other, stunned and pale. I wanted to laugh, wanted to call it a dream, but my voice caught in my throat. We didn't speak much on the drive home. Silence hung heavier than any conversation could. And even now, weeks later, I can't shake it. At night, when the wind howls through the trees near my house, I swear I hear it. The soft, indistinct whispers, the laughter just beyond hearing, and the faint brush of fog curling around my bedroom window. Sometimes I wake, sure I can hear footsteps circling the house, slow and deliberate. I know it's not real, and yet it is. The ridge, the fog, the voices, they've marked me in a way I can't explain. The forest hasn't let me go, even when I'm far from it. I still think about that day every time I drive past the Appalachian ridges. Sometimes I want to go back, to prove it was nothing, that I imagined the whole thing. But then I remember the shapes in the fog, the way it moved with intent, the way the whispers called my name just when I thought I was alone. I can feel that mountain watching me, even from miles away. And I know, deep down, that if I ever return, the fog will be waiting, ready to claim me again, or at least to make me doubt everything I believe about the world I know. The ridge keeps its secrets, and I am still learning how powerless I am against them. Even now, the wind carries those voices. I hear fragments, My name, my friends' names, distorted laughter, syllables that mean nothing yet feel urgent. I dream of fog rolling over familiar trees, swallowing trails, and the whispers guiding me toward nothing. I wake in a sweat, chest tight, convinced I hear footsteps outside my window, and I know that the Appalachian ridges have their memory of me, as I have theirs. And just like that, the fear never really leaves. You carry it, because somewhere out there, the fog is waiting, patient, endless, and always moving. Story 7. The Unseen Campers. I remember thinking we'd finally found a place untouched, a small hollow tucked beneath the ridge where the trees arched like a natural cathedral. It was late afternoon when we stumbled upon it, and the sun slanted low, spilling a soft golden light across the clearing. There were no paths leading in, no obvious signs of human presence, and that made it feel like a secret carved out just for us. We were tired from the hike, our packs heavy with supplies, and the stillness seemed like a balm. The grass was thick, damp with evening dew, and I could almost smell the earthy sweetness of moss and pine. We pitched our tents slowly, each of us enjoying the rare quiet. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe we were alone in the world. As darkness settled, the forest transformed. Shadows grew long, curling around the base of the trees, and the wind carried faint, indecipherable whispers. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself it was only the wind rattling the leaves, but then I heard it. Laughter, soft and distant, drifting down from the ridge above. It was tentative, almost hesitant, like it didn't quite belong. I froze, straining to hear over the rustle of the tents and the occasional snap of a twig, and then I caught it again. A quiet murmur of words, the syllables indistinct but deliberate, floating just out of reach. We called out, half in jest, half in fear. Hello? Is someone there? The sound of our own voices seemed alien in that space, swallowed immediately by the dense brush and the curve of the ridge. Nothing answered. I remember gripping the edge of my sleeping bag, my fingers tightening, and hearing the distant crackle of fire. Not close, but unmistakable, like someone had started a small blaze just beyond the trees, the glow hidden by the undergrowth. My heart beat faster. We spent the night on edge. Every snap of a branch, every shift of wind through the leaves seemed amplified. I kept imagining shapes moving just beyond the light of our lantern, shadows that lingered too long before dissolving into the blackness. And then came the laughter again, softer this time, almost intimate, as if someone was moving closer but not crossing the invisible boundary of our clearing. I wanted to believe it was other campers, just out of sight, but there was no pattern to it, no logic. The sounds would flare up and then fade, teasing us. At one point, I thought I saw a figure crouched on the ridge, motionless, watching. By the time I blinked, it was gone. Morning did not bring relief, only an eerie, unnatural stillness. The ridge above looked empty, yet as we stepped out of our tents, we noticed the grass, trampled, flattened in patches where no human footprints could lead. No boots, no bare feet, just the impression that someone or something had passed through. There was no trash, no sign of campfires, nothing to suggest anyone had been there before us except the evidence in the ground. We circled the clearing, calling out again, but the air remained still, carrying only the scent of damp earth and pine resin. I kept thinking about the voices and laughter, how they had seemed so purposeful, so aware of us without ever revealing themselves. Every instinct screamed that we had been watched, that someone had been observing us, maneuvering around the edge of our perception, just out of reach. And yet, the more I looked, the less I found. It was as if the forest had swallowed them whole, leaving only the memory of presence, a phantom footprint etched into the soil of my mind. We tried to rationalize it. Other hikers, local kids playing tricks, even echoes from the ridges above, but nothing fit. Hikers leave signs, discarded wrappers, footprints, broken branches. Local kids leave noise, but this was subtle, precise, almost intelligent. It wasn't just the sound of movement, it was the awareness that unsettled me. Whoever or whatever had been there knew we were there, and that knowledge pressed down on us like a weight. I remember sitting on a fallen log, my coffee going cold in my thermos, staring at the ridge, and feeling the forest breathe around me. Leaves stirred without wind, a faint snap echoed where no branch had broken, and the laughter, the soft, tentative laughter, crept into the edges of my hearing again, just behind me, perhaps to the right, then above, then gone. It carried a tone I can't describe, not malicious, not playful, but deliberate. It lingered in the space between the trees as if testing our courage, gauging our fear. We packed up quickly, though our legs trembled not from exertion but from unease. Every sound seemed magnified on the ridge, the subtle crunch of our boots against dead leaves announcing our movement. I glanced over my shoulder repeatedly, expecting, wanting, to see someone, anyone, but there was nothing. Still, the impression remained. We had not been alone. It clung to the soil, the air, the very brush and bark of the forest. Back at the parking lot, after the hike down, I could still hear it, faintly, carried in the wind through the ridge. Laughter, murmurs, conversations that never had words. I tried to tell myself it was the memory playing tricks on me, that exhaustion and stress had conjured these illusions. But the image of the flattened grass and the absence of footprints gnawed at reason. And sometimes, late at night, I hear it again, in my dreams, or when the wind shifts just right. Tiny, deliberate echoes of that night, teasing, watching, reminding me that we were never really alone in that hollow. I haven't returned, and I never will. Some part of me knows there's nothing physical to find, nothing to confront. Yet the memory lingers, like a shadow I cannot shake. Every now and then, when I'm driving past a ridge or a hollow in the distance, my skin prickles, and I hear a whisper carried on the wind. It's faint, indistinct, but unmistakable. Someone, or something, was there, observing us, perhaps still observing. And the most haunting part is knowing that even though we saw nothing, left no trace of ourselves, the ridge remembers. It remembers our presence. And I can't help but wonder if it still waits for others, testing their courage the same way it tested ours, leaving them with nothing but the eerie, unshakable impression that they are not alone. I talk about it sometimes, careful to leave out certain details, afraid someone might think I'm imagining it. But I'm not. The forest has a memory, and it carries echoes of everything it sees. That night, we were its guests, unaware of the subtle, deliberate observation that threaded around us like a current we could not feel until it was too late. I keep thinking about the ridge, about the flattened grass, and the faint laughter that has somehow etched itself into my mind. It's not fear exactly, not entirely, but a restless unease, the certainty that some places are not meant for us, and yet they claim our attention anyway. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can see that hollow, the trees arching overhead, the faint glimmer of movement at the edges of vision. And sometimes, when the wind shifts, I swear I hear the whispers again, subtle, deliberate, carrying across the miles, reminding me of a night on a ridge where the forest itself seemed alive, watching and waiting. It was a lesson in patience and presence, in the terrifying realization that absence does not mean emptiness, and that silence can carry more weight than any scream. The memory doesn't fade. I can still feel the pressure of unseen eyes, the way the laughter made the hairs on my arms rise. I can still imagine the ridge, the hollow, and the space where we slept. our presence noted and catalogued by something just beyond our perception. That night left a mark, a quiet terror that lives in the peripheral of my awareness, a reminder that some encounters in the Appalachians are not meant to be understood, only survived, and survive we did, but not unscathed. The ridge keeps its secrets, and perhaps in some subtle, unfathomable way, it keeps us too. We never went back. The hollow remains out there, just beyond the trails we know, and I cannot shake the sense that the forest still remembers. That is the most unnerving part. Not the sounds, not the night itself, but the knowledge that even in leaving, even in claiming to forget, the place holds its memory, and its memory, somehow, holds ours. Story 8. The Old Trail Marker. I'd been hiking that old trail for hours, the kind of path most locals avoid because it disappears into nothing more than scrub and gnarled roots after a mile or two. The sun was already tilting west, and the air carried that heavy, earthy smell that comes just before evening, the kind that makes the forest feel almost alive. That's when I spotted it. A rusted metal marker nailed crookedly to the side of a moss-covered oak. I'd never seen it before, not in the handful of times I'd been through these ridges. Its surface was pitted with age, and etched into it were markings that looked like tally marks, but not just random scratches. There was a rhythm to them, deliberate, counting something I couldn't understand. I ran my fingers along the grooves, though the cold metal made me flinch, and for a moment a strange unease slid over me, as if the forest itself had paused to watch. The rest of the hike was quiet, the usual rustle of squirrels and the distant call of a jay replaced by an oppressive silence. My footsteps felt louder than usual, crunching over dry leaves, echoing oddly in the narrowing canyon of trees. Every so often I glanced back, half expecting to see someone following me, though I knew I was alone. The marker haunted my thoughts. I kept imagining those tally marks shifting, multiplying, like they were keeping score of something in the woods. I shook my head, tried to laugh it off, and pressed on, telling myself that old rusted trail markers often have strange carvings, relics of someone's forgotten past. By the time I stopped to rest, the sun was almost gone. I set my pack down against a fallen log and tried to ignore the way the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally around me. Then I heard it, a snap, sharp and deliberate, like a branch being broken underfoot. I froze, scanning the darkness between the trees, heart hammering. Nothing moved, just the whisper of the wind through dead leaves. Another snap followed, and then a low, guttural growl, not high-pitched like a fox or coyote, but deeper, resonant, a sound that seemed to shake the forest floor. My stomach knotted, and I took a cautious step forward. I thought maybe I'd imagined it, that the solitude and the fading light had made the forest play tricks on me. But then I heard the growl again, closer this time, and a faint rustling behind me, subtle but unmistakable. I spun around. The marker, where I thought I'd left it an hour ago, appeared to be just at the edge of my peripheral vision, glinting in the last light. I told myself I'd walked past it, that it couldn't have moved, but my rational mind felt suddenly flimsy, like the floorboards of a house abandoned for decades. The shadows in the woods thickened. Each step I took forward seemed to bring them closer, not me to them, but them to me. I turned again to glance back at the marker, and for a terrifying instant, I thought I saw something crouched behind the tree, too still, too deliberate to be an animal. My breath caught, chest tight, hands trembling. I started walking faster, following the faint trail that was just barely visible in the dimming light. Every few minutes, I'd stop, convinced I heard more branches snapping, faint growls echoing off the ridges. I kept glancing behind me, heart hammering, and every time, the marker seemed closer, as if it had slid along the trail while I wasn't looking. Night came quickly, almost unbearably fast. I switched on my headlamp, the narrow beam cutting through the darkness, casting long, crooked shadows over the trees. The trail beneath me disappeared in a tangle of roots and brush, and that's when panic started to take hold. The snapping and growling continued, now punctuated by a subtle, irregular rustling, like footsteps circling just beyond the light. I wanted to run, but fear had rooted me in place, my body stiff and trembling. Every time I tried to move faster, the woods seemed to close in around me, twisting, swallowing the familiar path I thought I'd followed. I stumbled over a fallen branch and went down hard, my flashlight swinging and illuminating only the thick darkness ahead. That's when I realized I had no idea which direction was the main trail. I was deep in a part of the ridge I'd never been, the terrain unfamiliar and suffocating. I tried to retrace my steps, but the forest had changed around me. Trees I had passed before now seemed to form a barricade, roots and vines blocking the way. And the marker, oh God, the marker. It appeared at the edge of the flashlight beam again, the tally marks glinting, counting me in some unseen ledger. My mind screamed that this wasn't possible, that I must be losing it, but the metallic coldness of the marker when I approached confirmed it was real. I pressed on blindly, groping along the trees, relying on memory and the distant murmur of the ridge. The sounds followed me, the snaps, the growls, and something else now, faint and human-like, almost a whisper carried on the wind. My name. I froze, paralyzed. I hadn't told anyone I was out here, and there was no one else in the woods. Yet I heard it again, barely audible, slithering through the trees like smoke. My name, drawn out, urgent. I started running, stumbling blindly over roots and rocks, desperate for a familiar sight. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving me in near complete darkness, with only the faint glow of the fading moon illuminating the trail in patches. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell. Time had become a loose, unmanageable thing in that forest. My legs burned, lungs heaving, mind screaming for sense, for reason, for a way out, and then, suddenly I saw the main trail just ahead. Unmistakable gravel and a faint tire track from the parking lot. Relief surged through me, but it was short-lived. Behind me, the faint silhouette of the marker glinted one last time between the trees, then disappeared into the shadows, leaving no trace. I ran until I collapsed at my car, lungs heaving, hands shaking, staring back into the dark ridges as though the forest itself had eyes. I never went back. Friends asked if I was exaggerating, if I had misread the trail or imagined the sounds, but I know what I heard. That marker, those tallies, they weren't just rust and scratches. They were something else, something that belonged to the ridge, something that kept track of those who wandered too far, too deep. Even now, sometimes when I close my eyes, I see the marker leaning against the tree, feel the oppressive weight of the forest pressing down, hear the faintest scraping and snapping in the distance. I tell myself it was just the wind, just the shadows, just exhaustion. But deep in my chest, in the quietest part of my mind, I know the ridge remembers me, and it will not forget.